The eviction notice arrived on a Tuesday, which Maya Reeves had always considered the cruelest day of the week. Not Monday, when at least failure felt appropriate, and not Friday, when you could drown it in the illusion of the weekend. Tuesday just sat there, ordinary, indifferent, the kind of day that had no business carrying the weight of lives falling apart. She read it twice at the kitchen table of the apartment she shared with her 2 children, the paper trembling slightly in her hands. Not from emotion, not yet, just from the cold. The heating unit in the second bedroom had been cycling on and off for 3 weeks, and she had been rerouting the space heater between the kids' room at night and the main living area during the day, splitting warmth the way she split everything, carefully, with the quiet mathematics of someone who knew exactly what she couldn't afford to waste. 30 days. That's what the notice gave her. 30 days to produce the 2 months of back rent she owed, or vacate the premises at 14B Oswald Terrace, Tulsa, Oklahoma, a building that smelled of mildew and old cooking oil and the particular sorrow of people living too close to the edge of things. Maya set the notice down next to the other papers on the table. Past due electric bill, 3 months behind. A letter from the school about Lily's field trip, the one that cost $45 she didn't have and had been avoiding looking at for 2 weeks. A collection notice from the medical group that had treated Caleb's ear infection in October. $40 copay. She hadn't been able to cover it then. It had metastasized, onto the way small debts always did, into a $300 collection account with a number she didn't answer anymore. Lily was 9 years old and had recently started choosing her clothes quietly, without complaint, in the dark mornings before school. The way children learn to do when they understand that asking for different shoes or a better coat is the same as asking their mother to hurt a little more. Caleb was 6 and still innocent enough to want things openly. He'd asked for a birthday cake 2 weeks ago, not a store-bought one, just a homemade cake with frosting and candles. Maya had made it with a box mix and a half-used tube of red icing she'd found at the back of the cabinet. He'd been happy. She'd cried in the bathroom afterward, running the water so he wouldn't hear. She was 34 years old, so she had 2 part-time jobs, one at the pharmacy on Route 9, cashiering 3 days a week, and one at a dry cleaning business downtown, where she worked the counter on alternating Saturdays and Sundays. She had 11 credits left toward a nursing degree she hadn't been back to finish in 4 years. She had a car with a cracked manifold that shuddered when she pushed it past 65 and would eventually fail entirely. And when it did, she had no idea how she would get to either job. She had $218 in her checking account and $47 in a coffee can she kept under the sink. Emergency money in the truest possible sense. Not emergency, as in a rainy day. Emergency, as in the children need to eat this week, and the account is at 0. She had, as far as she could calculate, no way out. The phone rang at 7:14 that morning, before the kids were up, and before she'd gotten through her second cup of thin grocery store coffee. The number was unfamiliar, an Oklahoma City area code she didn't recognize. She almost didn't answer it. The voice on the other end was measured, professional. A man who said his name was Gerald Oakes, from Oakes and Whitfield, attorneys at law. He spoke with the careful tone of someone accustomed to delivering complicated news to people who were not prepared to receive it. He told her that her father was dead. Maya's first response was silence, not grief. She was not ready for grief, had not prepared for it, had not thought about Raymond Reeves in any immediate or personal way in years. She'd thought about him the way you think about weather in a distant city, aware that it existed somewhere, choosing not to check. Raymond Reeves had died 11 days ago. A cardiac event, the lawyer said. He had been found by a neighbor who grew concerned after 3 days without seeing his truck move. He was 67 years old, living alone on the property outside Muskogee he had owned for the better part of 30 years. He'd had no other family, no other children, no surviving spouse. And in a will drafted 7 years ago and updated twice since then, he had left everything he owned to Maya. She told the lawyer she would need a moment. She set the phone face down on the table and looked out the window at the parking lot behind their building. A pickup truck with a cracked windshield was parked crooked across 2 spaces. A plastic bag was wrapped around a fence post, shivering in the November wind. The sky was the color of old concrete. She picked the phone back up. What exactly did he leave? The property, Mr. Oakes said. The house, the outbuildings, the land. Approximately 12 acres. And he said, and here the lawyer's voice took on an inflection she couldn't quite name, your father was very specific about one item in particular. There's a storm cellar on the property. It has been sealed for 31 years. Your father instructed in writing that you were to receive the only existing key. He wrote, and Mr. Oakes paused to read from the document directly, that you would know what to do with it when the time was right. Maya stared at the eviction notice on the table. How much is the property worth? She asked. Another pause. The house itself is in considerable disrepair. The land has some agricultural value, though it hasn't been actively farmed in over 2 decades. A realistic assessment would put the sale value somewhere in the range of $40,000 to $60,000, and that might be generous given the condition. She looked at the $218 in her account balance on her phone screen. $40,000 to $60,000 was not nothing. It was not life-changing, but it was not nothing. It was the gap between where she was and somewhere she could breathe. She told Mr. Oakes she would come. Raymond Reeves had not been a good father. Maya had spent years arriving at the precise formulation for what he had been, and that was the most accurate version she had settled on. Not a monster. Not an abuser. Not the kind of man who left bruises or broke things or made his family afraid. He had simply been absent in every way that mattered, even when he was standing in the same room. What he and Maya's mother had divorced when Maya was 11, the marriage had dissolved quietly without drama, the way exhausted things tend to end. Her mother, Linda, was a practical woman who did not believe in prolonging suffering, and Raymond was a man who seemed to understand, somewhere beneath his silences and his long drives and his habit of staring out windows at nothing, that he had already made his choices, and the rest was just accounting. He had moved to the property outside Muskogee the year after the divorce. He sent cards at Christmas and on birthdays, Maya's, never anyone else's, and the cards were always handwritten in his cramped, careful script, with $5 or $10 tucked inside when he had it. He called on holidays and asked questions that were too general to require real answers. How's school? How are things? How are you getting along? He never visited. Not once. When Maya got pregnant with Lily at 25, unmarried and 3 semesters from finishing her degree, she called him. She wasn't sure why. She'd called him the way you call someone when you need to hear a voice and you've run out of better options. He had listened to everything she said without interrupting. Then he had been quiet for a long time. You'll figure it out, he had said finally. You always have. It was both the truest and the most useless thing anyone had ever told her. They spoke 3 or 4 times a year after that. Brief calls. She told him about Lily, about Caleb when he came, about the jobs and the degree she kept intending to finish. He told her little. He spoke about the property with a vague affection, the way the land looked in spring, and the repairs he was making to the barn, the garden that produced more tomatoes than he could ever eat alone. He never mentioned the storm cellar. Not once in 23 years of sparse, careful conversation did he say a single word about it. And now, he was dead. And it was hers. Maya drove to Muskogee on a Friday in November, leaving the kids with her neighbor Mrs. Ibarra, a retired teacher who watched Lily and Caleb 2 mornings a week, in exchange for Maya doing her grocery runs. The drive was 2 hours on a good day. The manifold cough started about 40 minutes out, and didn't stop until she cut the engine in the gravel pull-off at the edge of Raymond's, her, property. She sat in the car for a moment before getting out. From the road, the property looked like neglect given architectural form. The farmhouse sat about 60 yards back from the fence line, a 2-story structure that had once been white and was now the color of old chalk, bleached by years of Oklahoma sun, stripped and faded and peeling in long, curling strips that made the walls look like they were shedding. The porch sagged on the left side, where a support post had rotted through, and nobody had replaced it. 2 of the front windows were covered with plywood that had warped and split. The screen door hung at an angle from its top hinge, swaying slightly in the wind. The land around it was flat and dry, brown November grass that whispered against itself. A barn stood about 100 feet to the east, its roof bowed in the middle, its red paint stripped down to bare wood in patches. A tool shed, a rusted trough, 2 dead oaks at the edge of the property line, their bare branches reaching up like hands asking for something. And there, about 40 feet to the north of the house, sitting in a shallow depression in the earth, like it was trying not to be noticed, the storm cellar. It was a simple structure, a concrete frame set into the ground, maybe 6 feet wide by 8 feet long at the surface, wooden doors angled like a tent, set on heavy iron hinges. Those doors were secured with a padlock the size of Maya's fist, modern, steel, obviously newer than everything else around it. Something Raymond had put there deliberately and recently. The doors themselves were weathered to gray, the wood swollen with decades of moisture, but they were solid. They hadn't rotted through. They hadn't been forced. Nobody had been inside that cellar in 31 years. Maya stood at the edge of the depression and looked at the padlock. She had the key in her coat pocket. Mr. Oakes had sent it by certified mail, a small brass key in a padded envelope with a typed note that said simply, "As requested by the estate of Raymond Reeves." She'd held it in her palm in the pharmacy parking lot after signing for the envelope, a small, ordinary piece of metal that felt heavier than it should. She did not open the cellar that first day. She wasn't sure why. Some instinct that the moment required more than impulse, that she needed to understand what she was standing in front of before she stepped inside it. She walked to the house first. The front door opened with pressure and a grudging, arthritic groan. Inside, the air was cold and still and carried the smell of an old man's long solitude. Coffee and dust and something like sawdust, a trace of machine oil. The furnishings were sparse and old, a plaid sofa that had been reupholstered at some point in the 1990s, and never again. A dining table with 4 chairs, only 2 of which matched. A wood stove in the corner of the living room, its pipe running up through the ceiling, a bucket of split logs beside it. The kitchen was small and functional. The counters were clean, dishes stacked in a drying rack beside the sink, waiting for use that would never come. A calendar on the wall from 2 years ago still turned to July, a month Raymond had apparently liked enough to leave up or had simply never noticed still hanging there. Upstairs were 2 bedrooms. The first was clearly Raymond's, a single bed with a plain wool blanket, a nightstand with a lamp, and a glass of water someone had long since forgotten to empty. The glass had a small ring of dried residue at the bottom, brown and faint, like the outline of something that used to be there. Beside the lamp was a photograph in a cardboard frame. Maya picked it up. It was a picture of her. Not recent. She was maybe 7 in the photograph, standing in front of what looked like a different house. Not this one. Squinting into the sun, one arm thrown around a dog she didn't remember having, laughing at something off camera. She did not know when it had been taken, or how Raymond had come to have it. But he had put it on his nightstand. In the last years of his life, in the quiet of a house he lived in alone, he had put her photograph next to the lamp he turned off when he went to sleep. Maya set it down carefully. She did not let herself cry. There was too much to do, and too little time, and grief was an extravagance she could not afford right now. Not today. The second bedroom held no bed. Instead, it held boxes, dozens of them, stacked to the ceiling in careful rows, each one labeled in Raymond's handwriting. Tools, hardware, electrical, plumbing supplies, books, seeds. He'd been accumulating things, storing them with a systematic thoroughness that seemed almost compulsive, like a man preparing for something, or preserving something, or both. On the top of one stack, set apart from the others, was a shoebox sealed with a single piece of masking tape. On the tape, in Raymond's cramped hand, for Maya. When you're ready, she took it with her when she left. She opened it in the car before she drove back to Tulsa. Inside were 3 things. The first was a letter, handwritten, 7 pages on lined notebook paper, dated 14 months before Raymond's death. The second was a hand-drawn map of the property, rendered with surprising precision, each outbuilding labeled, distances noted in pencil, a dotted line running from the house to the storm cellar. At the storm cellar, an arrow, and the words, "Go down," all the way down. Read the wall. The third was a photograph of the storm cellar doors, taken from about 10 feet away, in what looked like summer light. The doors were open in the photograph. The darkness below was absolute. She read the letter. It took her 20 minutes, sitting in the cold car at the edge of the gravel pull-off, the engine off, or her breath coming in small clouds. Raymond wrote the way he had always spoken, carefully, without ornamentation, saying only what needed to be said, and nothing extra. But there was something in the 7 pages that none of his phone calls had ever carried. Urgency. Not the urgency of emergency, but the urgency of a man who had been holding something back for a very long time, and finally understood that time was running out. He wrote about the property, about how he had come to own it, not through inheritance or purchase in the usual sense, but through a story he had never told anyone. Not Maya's mother, not Maya, not a single person living. He wrote that he had been carrying it alone for 31 years, and that the loneliness of that had been one of the great costs of his life, and he was sorry for what that cost had required of other people, of her. He wrote that the storm cellar had been sealed in November of 1993, that what was inside had been placed there by a man named Douglas Whitaker, who had been Raymond's employer for 6 years, and who had trusted Raymond with the knowledge of what was there, because Raymond was, in Douglas's words, the only man he'd ever met who couldn't be bought. He wrote that Douglas Whitaker had died in 1994 without leaving other heirs, without filing the proper documents, without telling anyone else what he had put beneath the earth on that patch of land outside Muskogee, and that Raymond had spent the 30 years since in a state of careful, deliberate paralysis, afraid to open the cellar, afraid to report it, afraid to touch it, afraid to leave it. So he had done the only thing he could think to do. He had stayed. He had watched over it. He had padlocked the doors and put the key away, and built a life around the thing, like you build a house around a foundation, the structure existing to protect what's underneath. And now he was dying. His heart was failing in ways the doctors described with clinical neutrality that he translated, alone in his kitchen on the property, as not long. And the only person in the world he trusted enough to leave it to was a daughter he had failed, in every ordinary way a father can fail. He wrote, "I know I don't have the right to ask you to trust me. I lost that right a long time ago, but I'm asking anyway. Go down. What's there is yours. What you do with it is up to you. I only ask that you do it carefully, and that you remember it came from a good man who never got the chance to decide what it meant. He did not write what was in the cellar. He wrote, 'You'll see for yourself.' I think you need to see it for yourself." Maya sat in the car until the sun dropped below the tree line, and the cold became serious. Then she started the engine and drove back to Tulsa. She told no one. Not yet. She told Mrs. Ibarra she'd been to sort through her father's belongings, and that the property needed work before she could list it. She told her supervisor at the pharmacy that she might need a few days of personal leave. She told Lily, who was old enough to notice when something was different, that Grandpa had left them a house and they were going to go look at it. Lily said, "Was he nice?" Maya thought about the photograph on the nightstand, the 7 pages on lined paper, the shoebox labeled in careful handwriting. "He was trying to be," she said. She went back to the property on a Monday, 2 weeks after the first visit. She brought a flashlight, a crowbar she borrowed from Mrs. Ibarra's son, a pair of work gloves, a thermos of coffee, and the brass key in her coat pocket. She stood at the cellar doors for a long moment. The sky was low and gray, the kind of sky that never quite decides to snow. The wind moved through the brown grass with a sound like someone breathing. The land was so flat and so quiet that she could hear a truck passing on the county road, a half-mile away. She crouched at the padlock. The key fit perfectly. The lock opened with a clean, firm click that seemed too decisive for the moment, as if it had been waiting and was relieved to finally stop. She put both hands on the right cellar door and pulled. It was heavy, swollen with moisture, resistant. Then it gave way with a groan and a rush of cold air that came up from the dark like an exhale. She pulled the left door too. Both open now, the darkness below her absolute. The smell that came up was cool and dry, not the damp rot she'd expected, but something more mineral, more ancient, like the inside of a cave, like stone and time. She clicked on the flashlight. Concrete stairs descended, 10 steps, the walls close on either side, the ceiling low enough that she would have to duck her head. The stairs were dry, no standing water, no evidence of flooding or collapse. She went down. The space at the bottom was larger than the surface structure suggested. So the cellar extended under the ground in a rectangular room, maybe 20 feet by 12, the ceiling about 7 feet high, built from poured concrete that showed no cracks, no seepage, no deterioration. Raymond or Douglas or both had done the work right. Whatever this was, it had been built to last. Her flashlight swept the room. The left wall held shelves, wooden, old, but solid. Stacked on them were tools in labeled bins, canned goods in rows, the ordinary provisions of someone who had once expected to use this place for its intended purpose. Survival. The right wall held nothing. Just concrete. The back wall stopped her breath. It was not bare concrete. The back wall had been painted. A mural of sorts. Or not a mural exactly. More like a record. Painted in a careful, deliberate hand. On the kind of hand that was not artistic, but was thorough. Measurements, notations, small drawings of containers, each labeled in the same compact script, with numbers beside them. And at the center of the back wall, taking up perhaps half the surface, was a sentence painted in letters 6 inches tall. For whoever comes after, this is real. Beneath it, smaller, D.L. Whitaker, November 4th, 1993. Below the painting, stacked against the back wall and covered with canvas tarps, were rows of objects, rectangular, uniform, stacked like bricks. The tarps were the heavy green kind used for outdoor equipment, tied down at the corners with cord that had yellowed with age. Maya stood at the foot of the stairs and looked at them. She counted 12 tarps. Each one covered a stack. She walked to the nearest one, crouched, lifted the edge of the canvas. Beneath it were bars, metal bars, cast in a rectangular shape, each one approximately 9 inches by 3 by 2. They were arranged in a flat layer across the wooden pallet beneath the tarp, and there were many of them. She counted the top layer. 15 bars. She estimated the depth of the stack. 5, 6 layers deep, maybe more. The bars were the color of old amber in the flashlight beam, a warm yellow gold that did not tarnish, did not rust, that did not gray. A color that was not paint or lacquer or any coating she could name. She picked one up. It was extraordinarily heavy. Both hands. A weight that seemed impossible for its size, the density of it wrong in the way that only very few things are wrong. Wrong in the direction of more than expected, more than seemed possible, more than the laws of ordinary objects appeared to allow. She turned it over. On one face, stamped in the metal, were 4 characters, a series of numbers, and a mark she didn't recognize, circular, with lines radiating from the center. She set it down carefully. Her hands were shaking. She lifted the second tarp. Same thing. Bars stacked on a pallet. The same amber gold color. The same impossible weight. Third tarp. Fourth. She went down the row. All of them. 12 pallets of gold bars in a storm cellar outside Muskogee, Oklahoma, sealed under the earth for 31 years by a man named Douglas Whitaker, who had trusted her father to keep them safe. Her father, who had spent 3 decades living on top of this secret, tending it like a garden he was not allowed to harvest, protecting it for someone he had believed would eventually come. Maya sat down on the concrete floor of the cellar, with her back against the wall and her flashlight in her lap, and the darkness pressing in from every direction beyond the beam. She did not feel elated. She did not feel triumphant. She felt the particular dislocation of someone whose coordinates have suddenly and completely changed. The way sailors must feel when the star they've been navigating by turns out to be in a different position than the chart said. Everything is technically fine, but you are not where you thought you were. The eviction notice was still on her kitchen table in Tulsa. Lily's field trip cost $45, and Maya Reeves was sitting on the floor of a concrete room that contained, by her rough and entirely unprepared estimate, an amount of gold so large she had no immediate framework for understanding it. She stayed down there for 2 hours. She did not touch anything else. She sat and she breathed, and she thought about Raymond's letter, about a man named Douglas Whitaker who had never gotten the chance to decide what it meant. She thought about her father on his single bed, with his wool blanket and her photograph on the nightstand. She thought about Lily choosing her clothes in the dark so she wouldn't be a burden. She thought about Caleb and his birthday cake and the red icing. When she finally climbed back up the stairs and stood in the cold November air, she locked the cellar doors behind her. The padlock clicked shut with the same clean finality as before. She stood with her hand on the lock for a moment. Then she walked to the farmhouse and sat at Raymond's kitchen table and opened her laptop and began, very quietly, to try to understand what she had found. The mockery started before she'd made a single decision. This was the thing she hadn't anticipated. She had told precisely 2 people about the property. Her mother, Linda, who lived in Broken Arrow, and who had received the news of Raymond's death with the particular composure of someone who had already finished grieving that relationship many years ago. And her ex-husband, Derek, because Lily and Caleb were Derek's children too, and because the inheritance would affect where they lived and how they lived, and she believed he had the right to know. She told them both only what the lawyer had said, that she had inherited property, that it needed work, that she was trying to assess whether to sell it or do something else with it. She said nothing about the cellar, nothing about the bars, nothing about the back wall with its painted sentence, "This is real." Linda's response was immediate and predictable. "Maya, that man spent his whole life making decisions that cost other people. Don't let him cost you any more time. Sell it for what you can get and move on." Her mother said this with love. That was the thing. She said it out of genuine love and genuine concern, and she was not wrong, and it landed like a stone in shallow water anyway. Derek's response was worse, not because he was cruel. Derek had never been cruel, which was one of the more confusing things about a marriage that had failed anyway. He was practical in the way that people are practical when they're trying to protect themselves from hope. $40,000, he said. He'd been washing dishes when she called, and she could hear the water running. That's before taxes and estate fees and whatever the property actually sells for. You're looking at maybe $30 after everything. That covers the back rent and gives you a few months. I don't see what the decision is. She told him she was still assessing it. "Maya," he paused, "shut off the water. You have 2 kids and 2 part-time jobs, and you're 3 weeks from losing your apartment. This isn't the time to be sentimental about a father who wasn't there. Sell it." She said she heard him. That night, after the kids were asleep, she sat at the kitchen table with Raymond's letter spread in front of her and a calculator on her phone. She had been researching gold prices for 5 days. The current price per troy ounce, the weight of a standard gold bar, approximately 27 pounds, or about 400 troy ounces. The value, on that current prices, of a single standard bar. She had not yet been able to confirm exactly how many bars were under those 12 tarps, or whether they were standard weight, or what their purity was, or a dozen other things she did not know how to evaluate. But even the most conservative estimate she could construct, even assuming the bars were smaller than standard, even assuming significant uncertainty in every variable, returned a number that made her hands go cold. Her most conservative estimate was $280 million. Her less conservative estimate was higher. She sat with that number for a long time. $280 million. In a concrete room under a patch of dry Oklahoma farmland, locked behind a padlock, covered with canvas tarps, sitting in the dark for 31 years. Waiting. The problem was not the money, but the problem, or rather, the first of many problems, was that she did not know what the money was. She did not know where it had come from. She did not know if it was legally hers or legally anyone's. She did not know what Douglas Whitaker had done to acquire 12 pallets of gold bars, or why he had buried them instead of depositing them in a bank, or whether burying them had been the act of a man protecting something legitimate or hiding something that wasn't. Raymond's letter addressed this, partially in the oblique way that Raymond had always addressed difficult things. Douglas made his money in oil and equipment, the old way, before any of it was regulated or taxed the way it is now. I don't know the whole story, and I don't think you need to know the whole story to know that he was a straight man. He didn't steal it. He didn't take it from anyone who needed it. He pulled it out of the ground and converted it and put it away because he didn't trust banks and he didn't trust paper. He trusted gold. He trusted me. Those are the two decisions of his I know for certain, and I think they were both good ones. This was either everything she needed to know or nothing at all, and she couldn't yet tell which. She had started, very carefully, to research probate law in Oklahoma, what it meant to inherit property with unknown assets, who had the right to what, under which circumstances, whether 31 years of undisclosed storage created any kind of legal complication with title or ownership. The internet was not adequate for this. She needed a lawyer, a real one, not the pleasant, efficient Mr. Oakes who had handled Raymond's estate. He worked in general practice, and his expertise was wills and property transfers and straightforward things. She needed someone who knew about assets, about gold, about the specific tangle of inheritance and undisclosed property, and whatever other categories this situation fell into. She was trying to figure out how to pay for that lawyer when the comment showed up. It appeared on a neighborhood Facebook group she had joined 2 years ago for the occasional free furniture listing. Someone had posted a general inquiry. Does anyone know if the Reeves property on County Road 18 outside Muskogee has sold? I heard the old man finally died. The responses were mostly indifferent. No, hadn't heard anything. Shame about the place. Been an eyesore for years. Or then someone who listed themselves as a former neighbor wrote, his daughter inherited it. The one from Tulsa. Word is she's already been out there a couple times poking around. Good luck to her. That house needs to be condemned, not renovated. Someone else replied, isn't she the one working at the pharmacy on Route 9? That whole situation seems like a lot for one person to handle. And then, the one that sat in Maya's chest like a splinter. Bless her heart. She'd probably be better off just taking whatever she can get for the land and moving on. Some people hold on to things that aren't worth holding on to. Bless her heart. Maya closed the laptop. She sat in the dark of her kitchen in the cold apartment on Oswald Terrace. 2 children sleeping in the next room. An eviction notice on the table beside her. A calculator still open on her phone. She thought about what it felt like to be seen and found, wanting, before you'd done anything at all. She thought about Raymond, living alone for 30 years on a piece of land most people considered worthless, tending a secret that most people would have told long ago because carrying it alone was too much, guarding something he believed was important even when nobody else knew it existed, and nobody would have cared. She picked up her phone and texted Mrs. Ibarra. "Can you take the kids Saturday and Sunday? I have something I need to do." Then she went to bed. She lay in the dark and thought about a concrete room with a painted wall. For whoever comes after. This is real. She thought about 12 pallets under 12 canvas tarps. She thought about the impossible weight of a single bar in her 2 hands. She thought about Lily in the dark, choosing her clothes quietly so she wouldn't be a burden. She thought, I am not going to sell it. Not yet. Not until she knew what she had. Not until she understood the full shape of what Raymond had spent his life protecting. Not until she had done the thing he had believed she would do. The thing he had said she would know how to do when the time came. She was not sure she knew. She was not sure of anything. But the time had come, and she was the only person standing at the edge of it, and the only direction available was forward. Saturday morning, Maya Reeves drove back to Muskogee with a thermos of coffee and a notebook and a measuring tape and a camera and the brass key in her coat pocket. She parked at the gravel pull-off. She walked to the cellar doors. She opened the lock. She went down. And this time she started counting. The counting took most of Saturday and half of Sunday. She worked methodically, the way she had learned to work at jobs that required patience over speed, carefully, without shortcuts, checking and rechecking. She removed each tarp one at a time and photographed the pallet beneath before touching anything. She counted the bars in the top layer. She carefully lifted bars to count the layers beneath. She photographed every stamp mark she could find on every bar she was able to turn over. The stamps varied. Some bars carried marks she didn't recognize. Others carried marks that, when she photographed them and searched later on her phone, she identified as assay marks from refineries that had operated in the mid-20th century, some in California, some in Texas, one in Switzerland. The marks indicated gold of high purity, 0.9999 in several cases, 0.999 in others. The highest purity available. She weighed a sample of bars on a postal scale she had brought from the apartment, the one she used to weigh packages when she sold things on eBay in better times. Most bars exceeded the scale's capacity. She improvised, using a kitchen scale she found in Raymond's pantry, a bathroom scale from upstairs, combining measurements where the precision of any single instrument failed. It was rough science, but it gave her numbers. By the end of Sunday, she had a count. 843 bars, standard weight or close to it, on the bars she had been able to measure. High purity across the sample she had checked. At current market price for refined gold of that purity, at the weight she had estimated for an average bar, to multiplied by 843. She sat on the cellar stairs with her notebook and did the arithmetic 3 times. $297 million. $297 million. Give or take. She wrote the number at the top of a new page in the notebook. She drew a circle around it. She looked at it for a long time. Outside the cellar, the November wind moved through the brown grass. The sky was the color of old concrete. Somewhere on County Road 18, a truck passed, and its engine faded, and the silence came back. Maya Reeves looked at the number she had written. She thought about Lily. She thought about Caleb. She thought about the eviction notice. She thought about the coffee can under the sink with $47 in it. So she thought about what it felt like to count pennies, when the gap between what you had and what you needed was immeasurable, and about how that gap had always seemed like a fact of the world. Permanent, structural, the kind of thing you accepted the way you accepted winter. She looked at the number. $297 million. She closed the notebook. She walked back up the stairs into the cold November air, locked the cellar behind her, and stood in the flat brown yard of the property her father had given her. She had 2 part-time jobs and an eviction notice and a car with a cracked manifold and no framework yet for understanding what she was standing in the middle of. But she had something else now, too. She had the number. And she was not going to tell anyone about it until she understood exactly how to protect it, how to claim it, and how to make sure that what Douglas Whitaker had buried in the dark and what Raymond Reeves had spent 30 years guarding in silence did not slip through her hands the way everything else had slipped through her hands. She had learned, in 34 years of being underestimated and overlooked, and told what she couldn't do and what she should accept, one thing above all others. You did not show your hand until you knew the rules of the game. She got in the car, she drove back to Tulsa, and she started making calls. The first call she made was to a woman named Patricia Solis. Maya had found her the way you find things when you don't have money for proper channels, through a circuitous route of internet searches and forum posts, and a recommendation buried in a 3-year-old Reddit thread about Oklahoma estate law. Patricia Solis was an attorney in Oklahoma City who specialized in what her website described as complex asset inheritance and undisclosed estate recovery. She was not cheap. Her hourly rate was listed at $340, which was more than Maya made in a full day at the pharmacy. But the website also said she took select cases on contingency, meaning she worked for a percentage of the outcome rather than upfront fees when the case met certain criteria. Maya called her on a Monday morning from the parking lot of the dry cleaner, sitting in her car before her shift started, because she did not want to make this call from inside her apartment, where the walls were thin, and Mrs. Ibarra's son, Demi, sometimes knocked to borrow things at odd hours. She told Patricia Solis 3 things: that she had inherited property with a sealed underground structure, that the structure contained what she believed to be a large quantity of refined gold bars, and that she needed to understand, before she did anything else, whether what she had found was legally hers. The silence on the other end lasted long enough that Maya checked her phone screen to make sure the call was still connected. Then Patricia Solis said, "How large a quantity?" Maya told her the number, the count, the estimated weight, the market value she had calculated. Another silence. Shorter this time. "I'm going to need you to come to my office," Patricia said, "and I'm going to need you to bring every document you have related to the estate. Every piece of paper the lawyer gave you, your father's letter, the map, everything. Don't touch anything else in that cellar until we've spoken. Don't tell anyone else what you've told me. And I mean anyone." Maya said she understood. "One more thing," Patricia said. Her voice had shifted into something more careful. "Do you know anything about how Douglas Whitaker acquired the gold? Where it came from originally?" Maya told her what Raymond's letter said. Oil and equipment. The old way, before regulation. He pulled it out of the ground and converted it. "Okay," Patricia said. That's important. We're going to need to verify that. There are a few different legal frameworks this could fall under depending on provenance, and the difference between them is significant. Are you prepared for this to take time? Maya thought about the eviction notice on her kitchen table. 30 days had become 22. I don't have a lot of time, she said honestly. I know, Patricia said. Most people in your position don't. Let's talk about what we can move quickly and what we can't. The drive to Oklahoma City was 2 hours on roads that had not improved since the last time she'd driven them. The manifold cough announced itself at the 40-minute mark and did not let up. Maya drove at 60 miles an hour with both hands on the wheel and the radio off, running calculations in her head the way she had learned to run them, constantly, quietly, updating the variables as they changed. Patricia Solis's office was on the 4th floor of a building that smelled of carpet cleaner and recycled air. The lawyer herself was 53, with close-cropped silver hair and the kind of professional composure that had been earned rather than performed. She shook Maya's hand and looked at her steadily, and did not do the thing that Maya had been bracing for. She did not look skeptical. She looked interested. They spent 4 hours together. Patricia read Raymond's letter twice. She studied the photographs Maya had taken in the cellar. She examined the map. She asked questions that were precise and unemotional and revealed a legal mind working through a problem the way a hand works through a tangle, methodically, without force, finding the points where things could yield. The first issue, she explained, was probate. Raymond's estate had passed to Maya through a properly executed will, filed with the county clerk in Muskogee, handled by Mr. Oakes with full legal standing. The property was Maya's, but the contents of the storm cellar were a different matter, specifically because they had not been inventoried, had not been disclosed in the estate filing, and had not been assessed for tax purposes. Oklahoma law required undisclosed assets discovered after the opening of an estate to be reported to the probate court. Failure to report could constitute fraud, regardless of intent. Maya had done nothing wrong yet, but the clock on doing something right was ticking. The second issue was provenance. Douglas Whitaker had died in 1994 without a will, or at least without one that had ever been filed. His estate had been probated at the time, small apparently, based on what was publicly disclosed. A truck, some equipment, a bank account with a modest balance. Nobody had known about the cellar. Nobody had cataloged it as an asset. That meant, technically, there was an argument, a weak one, but an argument, that the gold had never been legally transferred to anyone and existed in a kind of ownership limbo, subject to claims from Whitaker's heirs, if he had any, or potentially from the state, if no heirs could be established. The third issue was the one Patricia said she wanted to address immediately. Before we go any further with the legal architecture, I need to know, do you have any reason to believe the gold was obtained illegally? Not just informally or off the books, I mean illegally. Stolen, fraudulently acquired, connected to anything criminal. Maya said she didn't know for certain, but Raymond's letter said no. Raymond's letter is a starting point, Patricia said carefully. It's not evidence. We're going to need to do some research into Douglas Whitaker, who he was, what he did, where his money came from. If this gold has clean provenance, we have a strong case that it passes to you through the estate. If the provenance is complicated, we have a more complicated case. Either way, we don't move forward blind. She told Maya that she was willing to take the case on contingency, with a fee of 18% of the final recovered value after legal costs. If the case failed or the assets were seized, Maya owed nothing. Maya asked what the odds were. Patricia was quiet for a moment, looking at the photographs spread across her desk. "I've handled 7 cases involving undisclosed estate assets," she said. "I've won 5. The 2 I lost involved provenance problems that we couldn't resolve. The money turned out to be dirty." She looked at Maya. "Your father's letter says the man was straight. I'm inclined to believe it based on what I see here. A man who was hiding stolen gold doesn't keep it for 30 years without touching it, and then give it to his estranged daughter. That's not what that behavior looks like." Maya said. "What does it look like?" "It looks like someone who was afraid," Patricia said. "And afraid is a different problem than criminal." The research into Douglas Whitaker took 11 days. Patricia's paralegal, a precise young man named Seth, pulled records from the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, county deed filings going back to 1960, tax records, business licenses, newspaper archives in 3 counties. What emerged was a picture that Maya found herself studying, the way you study a photograph of someone you've never met, but are somehow related to, looking for the features that explained the story you'd already been told. Douglas Leonard Whitaker had been born in 1928 in Muskogee, Oklahoma. He had started working in the oil fields at 17, dropped out of school, spent his 20s as a roughneck, and his 30s as an equipment operator, and his 40s as a man who understood machines well enough to start selling them. By 1965, he had a small equipment leasing business that served the oil patch. By 1975, it was a medium-sized one. By 1985, he was a wealthy man by any measure that didn't involve comparison to the truly wealthy. Not a millionaire many times over, but comfortably, solidly, irreversibly solvent in a way that the son of an Muskogee farm laborer was never supposed to be. He had also, throughout his life, been profoundly and consistently distrustful of financial institutions. Seth found 2 letters to the editor in the Muskogee Phoenix from the early 1970s, signed by a D.L. Whitaker, that expressed, in the clipped prose of a man who had grown up during the Depression and never forgotten it, a particular alarm about inflation, about the abandonment of the gold standard in 1971, about what happened to people who trusted paper. They were the letters of a man who had watched his father lose everything in 1929 and had decided, at a cellular level, that the only thing you could really trust was something you could hold. He had, over the course of approximately 15 years, beginning in the early 1970s, converted a significant portion of his business earnings into gold. Not all at once, incrementally, using the kind of patience that came from not being in a hurry, from believing in the long term, from understanding that you weren't buying gold to spend it, but to keep it. He had used refiners in California and Texas and occasionally overseas. He had kept no single record of the full accumulation, because keeping full records was the kind of thing that created paper trails. And paper trails led to institutions, and institutions were the thing he was trying to avoid. He had never married. He had no children. His only living relative at the time of his death, according to the 1994 probate filing, was a sister in Wichita who had predeceased him by 8 months, and the estate had been filed as having no heirs, and the small disclosed assets had reverted to the state. But there was one more document. Seth found it in the deed records of Muskogee County. Filed in October of 1993, 1 month before the date painted on the cellar wall, was a notarized bill of sale transferring ownership of the property on County Road 18 from Douglas L. Whitaker to Raymond L. Reeves. The sale price listed was $1. The customary language for a transfer between parties who were, functionally, conducting a gift. Attached to the bill of sale was an addendum. One page, notarized by the same notary, signed by both Whitaker and Raymond. It read, "The undersigned transferor hereby acknowledges that certain personal property remains upon the above described premises at the time of this transfer, and that said property is conveyed in its entirety to the transferee as part of this transaction. The transferee accepts full ownership and responsibility for all personal property present on the premises as of the date of this instrument. All personal property present on the premises. Patricia called Maya at 7:30 in the morning when Seth found it. Maya was making school lunches. "It's clean," Patricia said. Her voice carried a controlled excitement, the excitement of a professional who had found what she was looking for and was not yet allowing herself to feel the full weight of it. Whitaker transferred everything. The property, the personal property on the property, all of it, directly to your father. Legally, explicitly, in a recorded document. Your father inherited everything from Whitaker in 1993. Which means, when Raymond died, everything passed to you. Maya set down the sandwich she was making. "Is it mine?" she asked. "Subject to proper reporting to probate court, proper tax assessment, and the process of legally documenting and appraising the assets, yes," Patricia said. "I believe it is yours, and I believe we can prove it." Maya stood at her kitchen counter in the apartment on Oswald Terrace. The eviction notice was still on the table. Lily was getting dressed in the next room. Caleb was eating cereal and watching something on a tablet propped against a bowl. "How long will the process take?" Maya asked. "If everything goes smoothly, 3 to 5 months for full legal clearance. And if everything doesn't go smoothly?" A pause. "That depends on whether anyone challenges the claim." Someone challenged the claim. His name was Brett Whitaker, and he materialized 10 days after Patricia filed the initial disclosure with the probate court, which was a matter of public record, which meant anyone looking for it could find it. Brett Whitaker was 51 years old, lived in Tulsa, and worked as a commercial real estate broker. He was Douglas Whitaker's great-nephew, the grandson of Douglas's brother Earl, who had died in 1988. Brett had not known Douglas personally. He had, by his own admission in the initial court filing, never visited Muskogee, never met Raymond Reeves, and had not been in contact with the Whitaker family in any meaningful way in over 20 years. But he had a genealogist and a lawyer from a firm on the 14th floor of a downtown Tulsa office building, and what they filed argued, with considerable confidence, that the 1993 bill of sale between Douglas Whitaker and Raymond Reeves had been executed under conditions of undue influence, specifically that Douglas, who had been diagnosed with early-stage heart disease in 1992, had been in a compromised state when he transferred the property, and that the nominal consideration of $1 made the transaction legally suspect. They filed a request to freeze the estate assets pending investigation. The judge granted a temporary freeze within 48 hours. Maya read Patricia's summary email at the pharmacy, standing at the register between customers, her phone hidden below the counter. She read it twice. Then she sent Patricia a reply that said, simply, "What do we do?" Patricia's response came within the hour. "We fight it. Their case has real weaknesses, The bill of sale was notarized. The addendum was explicitly recorded, and a nominal consideration is legally valid in Oklahoma for property transfers between parties who have an established relationship. We need to establish that relationship. Do you have anything in your father's papers that shows he and Whitaker had a history together? Employment records, correspondence, anything that confirms this wasn't a stranger transaction? Maya thought about the boxes in the second bedroom, the rows of carefully labeled boxes Raymond had spent years accumulating. She drove to Muskogee that Saturday. The boxes took the better part of 2 days to go through. She worked alone, sitting cross-legged on the floor of the second bedroom with a notebook beside her, opening each box in turn and documenting what was inside. Most of it was what the labels promised. Tools, hardware, books, seed catalogs going back 30 years, owner's manuals for equipment she couldn't identify. The kind of things a man kept when he had lived in one place long enough to accumulate the sediment of decades. But in the fourth row from the back, in a box labeled simply papers, she found something else. It was a manila envelope, thick with age, sealed with a strip of masking tape that had gone brittle and came away at a touch. Inside was a bundle of documents, loosely organized, some folded, some in their original envelopes, rubber banded together with a band that had dried and snapped at some point, and lay coiled around the bundle like a shed skin. The topmost document was a letter dated July 1987. The letterhead read, Whitaker Equipment Services, Muskogee, Oklahoma. It was addressed to Raymond Reeves and signed by Douglas L. Whitaker. The letter offered Raymond a position as site manager and general operations, lit at a salary that, for 1987, was generous. At the bottom, in a handwritten postscript, Ray, you come highly recommended, and I trust the man who recommended you. That's the only reference I ever needed. D. Beneath it were 6 years of pay stubs, filed in chronological order by someone, Raymond, presumably, who understood that documentation was a form of survival. Performance reviews, signed by Douglas, each one covering the same ground in different language. Reliable, competent, honest. A man you could trust with the keys. And at the bottom of the bundle, a single letter on plain paper, handwritten, no letterhead. Dated April 1993. Ray, my heart's gotten worse. The doctor doesn't say it plain, but I can read what's in his face when he talks. I don't have anyone to leave things to, which I never minded until now. I've been thinking about what I built, and what I saved, and what it ought to be used for. I've decided I trust you with it the same way I trusted you with everything else, because you never once gave me a reason not to. I'm going to have the lawyer draw up the papers for the land. The rest of it you already know about. Take care of it until the right time comes, or until someone comes along who needs it enough to deserve it. D. Maya sat on the floor of the second bedroom and held the letter. The right time comes, or until someone comes along who needs it enough to deserve it. She thought about Raymond on his single bed, alone for 30 years, guarding a secret he never told a soul, keeping faith with a dead man's trust. She thought about what it had cost him, or what he had not been, because of what he had chosen to be. The father who was always elsewhere, always distant, always holding something he couldn't put down. She photographed every document in the bundle. Then she drove back to Tulsa and sent the photographs to Patricia. Patricia called the next morning. This is the relationship, she said. 6 years of employment, documented. A letter explicitly describing the transfer of trust and the personal property. This directly undermines the undue influence claim. This wasn't a stranger with a vulnerable old man. This was a decades-long professional relationship, culminating in a deliberate transfer to the person Douglas trusted most in the world. She paused. Brett Whitaker's lawyer is going to argue that a letter isn't legally binding. That's true, but combined with the recorded deed and the notarized addendum, it establishes context in a way that will matter to a judge. Maya asked, "How long before the freeze is lifted?" "Hearing is scheduled for 6 weeks out. I'm filing a motion to expedite, given your financial circumstances." 6 weeks. Maya's 30 days had become 48 hours. She had been forced, finally, to tell her landlord about the inheritance, not the details, just the existence of it, the rough value of the disclosed property, and to request an extension based on anticipated sale proceeds. The landlord had given her 60 days, reluctantly, because evictions had costs too, and because Maya had always paid eventually. 60 days. Patricia needed 6 weeks. The arithmetic was survivable. Barely, if nothing went wrong. Things went wrong. Cole Hargrove introduced himself at the property on a Wednesday afternoon, 3 weeks after Brett Whitaker filed his challenge. He drove a black truck, new, clean, the kind of truck that had never been used for actual work, and he wore the particular combination of expensive boots and practiced informality that Maya had learned to recognize as the costume of men who wanted to seem approachable while they were doing something that was not. He was 46, broad-shouldered, with the confident physicality of someone who had played sports in high school and had been dining out on it for 25 years since. He ran a development company out of Tulsa. He had been trying to acquire the County Road 18 property, he told Maya pleasantly, for the better part of a decade. "Your father wasn't a selling man," he said, with a tone that managed to be both admiring and dismissive in the same breath. "But you seem like a practical person." He had a card. He held it out across the gap between them, like it was a gesture of goodwill and not a transaction. Maya took the card without looking at it. "What's your offer?" Cole's smile broadened at the directness. "For the land and structures as they sit, I can do $480,000. Cash. Closing in 30 days. No inspection contingency." He paused to let those numbers settle. "I know you've got some legal situation going on with the estate. I've done my research. That'll drag on for months, maybe longer. You've got kids. You've got bills. 480 cash now is better than a number on paper that might take years to materialize." Maya looked at him. $480,000. 3 weeks ago, she'd had $218 in her checking account. "I'm not selling," she said. Cole's smile did not change, but something behind it did. "I understand the attachment," he said. "It's your father's property. That's emotional. I respect that." He said the word emotional the way certain men said it, as both an observation and a diagnosis. "But practically speaking, what is your plan here? You can't renovate that house on what a pharmacy cashier makes. The legal battle is going to cost you regardless of outcome. And the property tax on land of this assessed value—" "I said I'm not selling," Maya said. "I appreciate you driving out." She walked back to the farmhouse. She did not look back at him. She heard him standing in the gravel for a moment longer than was comfortable. Then the sound of his truck door, the engine turning over, on the tires on the dirt road. She stood at the farmhouse window and watched his truck disappear around the tree line. Then she looked up Cole Hargrove on her phone. What she found was less interesting than what she couldn't find. His development company had a website with photographs of completed projects, commercial strips, a subdivision outside Broken Arrow, a small shopping center near Sepulpa, all unremarkable. Nothing that explained why a man of his scale would spend a decade pursuing a 12-acre parcel with a dilapidated farmhouse. She called Patricia. "Cole Hargrove," she said. "Development company out of Tulsa. He's been trying to buy this property for 10 years. Why would someone like that want this particular piece of land?" Patricia was quiet for a moment. "I'll look into it." "Did he know about the cellar?" "He didn't mention it." "That could mean he doesn't know," Patricia said. "Or it could mean he knows and is smart enough not to mention it." Another pause. "Maya, be careful. I want you to keep everything locked. Don't let anyone on the property without your explicit permission. And if he comes back, don't engage. What do you think he wants?" "Right now, I think he wants what he said he wants. But I've been doing this long enough to know that when someone has been pursuing a piece of property for 10 years and will not quit, there's usually a reason beyond what they're saying." The reason emerged in pieces, the way reasons tended to in Maya's experience, not all at once, but gradually, and each piece arriving in a context that made it seem small until you placed it next to the others and the shape became clear. The first piece came from Seth, Patricia's paralegal, who had been quietly pulling county records as part of building the provenance case and noticed something in the zoning history of the area around County Road 18. In 2019, the county had approved a preliminary plan for a large-scale commercial development, a logistics hub anchored by a distribution warehouse, contingent on acquisition of certain key parcels in the area. The contingency parcels were listed by parcel number. One of them was Raymond's property. The second piece came from an oil and gas database Seth accessed through the firm's professional subscriptions. The County Road 18 parcel had been surveyed for mineral rights 3 times in the past decade. All 3 surveys had been commissioned by a shell company whose registered agent, when you followed the chain carefully enough, was a lawyer who also appeared in the corporate filings of Cole Hargrove's development company. The third piece came from Maya herself. She had gone back to the box labeled papers and gone through it more carefully the second time, looking for anything she might have missed. Near the bottom, beneath the bundle she had already photographed, were 3 items she had set aside as unrelated on first pass and now reconsidered. The first was a hand-drawn diagram of the property, not the one in Raymond's shoebox, but an older one, rougher, that appeared to show not just the surface layout, but something below it. A notation in pencil, faint with age, alongside the storm cellar marking. Sub-grade, 22 feet below grade, full concrete, access via structure. The second was a clipping from a Tulsa business journal dated 2017. The clipping was about Cole Hargrove's development company. A profile. It mentioned his firm's interest in acquiring undervalued rural parcels in the Muskogee area and described, in the language of business journalism, a patient acquisition strategy that had so far encountered limited resistance. The third was a sticky note in Raymond's handwriting, attached to the back of the clipping. 4 words. "He's been watching us." Maya sat with this for a long time. Raymond had known Cole Hargrove was interested, had tracked him, had saved a clipping, had written a note, had chosen not to sell regardless of whatever pressure Hargrove had applied over the years. Raymond, who had spent 30 years in careful, quiet resistance, protecting a secret that had to do with something far more valuable than 12 acres of dry Oklahoma farmland. Had Cole Hargrove known about the gold? She called Patricia and read her the sticky note. Patricia's silence this time was the particular silence of someone whose mental model of a situation is undergoing rapid revision. "I need you to send me everything you just found," she said. "Today. Right now." Her voice was controlled but tight. "And I need you to go to the cellar and check that the lock is still secure." Maya was already walking. The lock was fine, undisturbed. She stood at the cellar doors with her hand on the padlock and looked out at the flat brown land and the bare tree line and the empty county road in the distance. She had one thought, clear and cold. Whoever else was circling this property, whoever had been watching it for years, they did not know what was inside. Because if Cole Hargrove knew about $297 million in gold bars under the ground, he would not have offered her $480,000 for the land. He would have offered her nothing at all. The hearing on Brett Whitaker's challenge came on a Tuesday morning in the Muskogee County Courthouse, which was a building that had been renovated twice since its construction, and now existed in a state of layered architectural regret. Original 1920s, limestone beneath 1970s, paneling beneath recent fluorescent lighting that made everyone look slightly unwell. Maya wore the same department store suit she'd bought at a clearance sale for a job interview 2 years ago. The hem was slightly frayed at the left ankle, where she'd caught it on a car door getting out in a parking garage. And she had repaired it with iron-on hem tape the night before. She sat beside Patricia and looked at the front of the room, and did not look at Brett Whitaker, who was seated with his attorney at the opposite table. She had met Brett Whitaker once before, briefly in the courthouse hallway, and the meeting had confirmed everything she'd been told and nothing she'd hoped for. He was a man who looked like a man who was owed something. It was in the set of his jaw, in the way he stood, in the particular impatience with which he occupied space. He had not looked at her with malice. That was almost worse. He had looked at her with the mild, incurious gaze of someone who was correcting an administrative error. Brett's attorney, a man named Harlan Fitch, who had the bearing of someone who had been expensive for a very long time, was opened by arguing that the 1993 transfer was legally insufficient because Douglas Whitaker had been, at the time of signing, a man in demonstrably declining health, executing a transaction for nominal consideration that dramatically undervalued the true property, and that these factors together constituted the conditions necessary to invoke undue influence under Oklahoma statute. Patricia responded by presenting the employment records. 6 years of documented professional relationship between Douglas Whitaker and Raymond Reeves, including performance reviews signed by Whitaker that described Raymond in terms that made the nature of their relationship unmistakable. Then she presented Douglas's letter to Raymond from April 1993, the one that said, "I trust you with it the same way I trusted you with everything else." Then she presented the notarized addendum, the recorded deed, and a 1-page affidavit from a handwriting analyst confirming that the signature on the bill of sale matched Douglas Whitaker's other authenticated documents from the same period. She argued that the transaction was not a predation on a vulnerable man. It was the deliberate act of a man making an explicit choice about who should receive the product of his life's work, based on a relationship of demonstrated trust that had been built over years. Harlan Fitch argued in rebuttal that the letter was informal, that informal letters established no legal obligation, that the true value of the estate had been concealed from the courts, both at Douglas Whitaker's 1994 probate and at Raymond Reeves's recent one, and that this concealment alone should give the court reason to scrutinize the legitimacy of the transfer. The judge, whose name was Carla Nix, and who had the manner of someone who had been doing this long enough to have clear opinions about people who made things complicated, looked at both attorneys over the top of her reading glasses for a moment before speaking. "The concealment issue is a legitimate concern," she said. "But concealment at the point of initial transfer is distinct from fraudulent acquisition. I'm looking at a notarized document, a recorded deed, an addendum that explicitly conveys personal property, and a body of documentary evidence establishing a years-long professional relationship that appears to have been the basis for this transfer. I'm also looking at a challenge from a man who has acknowledged, in his own filing, that he had no personal relationship with the decedent." She turned a page. "I'm going to deny the motion for a permanent freeze. I am going to require full disclosure and appraisal of undisclosed assets within 90 days, and I'm going to retain jurisdiction pending that appraisal. But Ms. Reeves is the legal inheritor of this estate, and this challenge does not provide sufficient grounds to change that determination." Harlan Fitch said they would appeal. Judge Nix said that was his prerogative. Patricia's hand found Maya's elbow beneath the table and pressed it once, briefly, a gesture that said, "This is as close to winning as things like this get." Outside the courthouse, in the November sun, Maya stood on the stone steps and breathed. She had won the first round. The freeze was lifted pending appraisal. The gold was still locked in the cellar. The case was still open, still subject to appeal, still far from over. But the direction had changed. The thing that had been sliding away from her had stopped sliding. Patricia was already on her phone, talking in the low, rapid tones of someone setting the next steps in motion. "I'm going to hire an independent appraiser, someone with credentials, specifically in precious metals and historical assets, someone whose opinion will hold in court. That process takes approximately 3 to 4 weeks. Once we have the appraisal, we can begin the formal process of tax assessment and legal title transfer for the assets." Maya said. "And the appeal? Whitaker's appeal will go to district court. Best case, it's denied within 60 days. Worst case, we go to another hearing. But the foundation is strong. The judge just told you that." Maya looked at the parking lot. Somewhere in the distance, a truck horn. Oklahoma in November. Flat and cold and indifferent, the sky pressing down. "Patricia," she said, "if the appeal fails, and the appraisal is complete, and the taxes are assessed, and everything resolves the way you're describing, what am I actually looking at? In real numbers. What ends up in my hands?" Patricia was quiet for a moment, not hesitating, calculating. At $297 million in gold value, federal and state capital gains tax on inherited assets will reduce that significantly, potentially 30 to 40%, depending on how the assets are classified. Legal fees, appraisal costs, estate tax on the undisclosed amount. If everything goes well, you're looking at somewhere between $160 and $180 million, clear, after all obligations. $160 to $180 million. Maya stood on the courthouse steps. The frayed hem of her suit brushed her ankle in the wind. She thought about the eviction notice, about the $218, about Lily's field trip and Caleb's birthday cake, about Raymond on his single bed with her photograph on the nightstand, about a man named Douglas Whitaker who had pulled money out of the ground and trusted it to the earth, and then trusted the earth to a man he believed in, and then, in some long, slow, silent chain of faith, trusted that man to find the right person to pass it to. She thought about the comment on the Facebook page. Bless her heart. She thought about Derek's voice on the phone. I don't see what the decision is. She thought about her mother, who had loved her and meant well and was wrong. She thought about Cole Hargrove and his black truck and his $480,000 and his patient acquisition strategy and the sticky note in Raymond's handwriting. He's been watching us. There was still the appeal, still the appraisal, still the tax assessment, still Patricia's warning about things that could go wrong and the 2 cases she had lost. Still the questions she couldn't answer yet about Douglas Whitaker and where exactly the money had come from and whether there was anything in that history that could complicate what the judge had just said. Still everything, really. The whole fight still in front of her. But the freeze was lifted, and the gold was still in the cellar. Aunt Maya Reeves was still standing. She walked to her car. The manifold cough started before she reached the parking lot exit. She drove back toward Tulsa at 60 miles per hour, with both hands on the wheel and the radio off. She called Derek that evening, after the kids were asleep. He listened without interrupting, which was a courtesy he extended only when he knew he had been wrong about something. She told him about the hearing, about the freeze being lifted, about Patricia's estimate. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, $160 million. To 180, she said, after taxes and fees. Another silence. Maya. His voice carried something she didn't often hear from him, something that wasn't quite an apology but lived in the same neighborhood. Why, I told you to sell it. I know. I told you to take $40,000 and walk away. I know, Derek. The silence this time was long and different. She could hear him breathing. The kids are lucky, he said finally, to have you. Maya sat in the dark kitchen. I haven't won yet, she said. No, he said, but you didn't quit. She said goodnight. She closed her phone. She opened her notebook to the page with the number on it. $297 million, circled in pencil. She sat with it for a moment. Then she turned to a new page and wrote at the top, "What comes next?" Beneath it, in the careful, methodical way she had learned to address problems too large for panic, the appraisal, the appeal, Cole Hargrove, the mineral rights surveys, the shell company, the logistics hub contingency plan. All the things she didn't understand yet. All the things someone had been doing, quietly, for years, in the space around this property that she had only just walked into. She was not finished being underestimated. She was not finished being told what she couldn't do. But she was not finished fighting either. She was, in fact, just beginning. She wrote one more thing at the bottom of the page, in Raymond's cramped, careful script, as best she could imitate it. The handwriting of a man who had kept faith with something impossible for 30 years, because he believed it was right. He's been watching us. She underlined it twice. Then she closed the notebook, turned off the kitchen light, and went to bed. Tomorrow had a shape now. Tomorrow had a direction. And Maya Reeves, who had learned in 34 years of counting pennies and stretching thin and being told to accept her circumstances, who had been left a brass key and a hand-drawn map and a letter from a father who had failed her in every ordinary way and protected her in one extraordinary one. She was not done digging. Not even close. The appraiser's name was Leonard Marsh, and he arrived at the property on a Thursday morning in December, driving a gray sedan that was conspicuously ordinary. No logo, no signage, nothing that announced what it contained in the hard-sided cases he carried from the trunk. He was 61 years old, with the unhurried precision of someone who had spent decades being right about things that mattered and had learned that accuracy was a form of patience. He had spent 22 years with the United States Mint, then another 12 as a senior consultant to the Federal Reserve's Vault Operations Division. Patricia had described him to Maya as the most credentialed precious metals appraiser west of Chicago, a man whose testimony had been entered into federal court proceedings 14 times without once being successfully challenged. He shook Maya's hand in the gravel pull-off. He looked at the farmhouse, the barn, the flat December land, and said nothing about any of it. His gaze moved, as if drawn by compass, to the storm cellar. "That's it?" he asked. "That's it," Maya said. She unlocked the doors. She went down first, clicking on the portable work light she had set up on her last visit. 4 of them on tripods, powered by a small generator she had borrowed from Patricia's office manager, filling the cellar with the kind of flat, or even illumination that made every surface visible and left nowhere for shadows to gather. Leonard Marsh came down the stairs and stood at the bottom for a long moment. He was quiet in the way of someone who is not speechless, but is choosing, deliberately, to absorb before reacting. His eyes moved across the room, the shelves on the left, the painted wall at the back, with its careful notations and its 6-inch letters, the 12 pallets under their 12 canvas tarps. He set down his cases. He opened the first one and removed a device that Maya did not recognize, rectangular, handheld, with a probe at one end and a small screen at the other. He ran it across the surface of the nearest tarp without touching the bars beneath, then nodded to himself and removed the canvas. The bars caught the work light and held it. That particular amber gold warmth that Maya had not been able to stop thinking about since the first time she'd seen it. The color of something permanent and elemental. The color of things that do not change. Leonard picked up a bar with both hands. He held it the way Maya had held the first one. That moment of recalibration as the weight registered. The adjustment to something denser than expectation. He turned it, examined the stamp marks, placed it on a portable scale he assembled from the second case. He noted the reading in a small bound notebook. He tested the surface with the handheld device. An X-ray fluorescence analyzer, he explained briefly, without being asked, that measured elemental composition through the surface without requiring a sample. He noted those readings too. He worked through the first pallet methodically, and testing a sample from each layer. Then he moved to the second, the third. He worked for 6 hours without stopping, pausing only to drink coffee from a thermos he'd brought and to make occasional notations in the notebook. Maya sat on the cellar stairs and watched him and said nothing because she understood intuitively that Leonard Marsh wasn't a man who needed company while he worked. He needed space. At 4 p.m, he closed his notebook, capped his pen, and turned to look at her with the expression of someone who has completed a calculation and arrived at a figure he is prepared to defend. "Do you want the full technical summary or the number first?" he asked. "The number," Maya said. He told her. She had estimated $297 million. Leonard Marsh, with his 22 years at the Mint and his X-ray fluorescence analyzer, and his careful 6 hours of work in a concrete room under 12 acres of Oklahoma farmland, arrived at a figure of $312 million, $400,000, based on current London Bullion Market Association spot price for refined gold of the purity levels he had confirmed. $312 million. Plus change. Maya sat on the cellar stairs with the work lights blazing and said nothing for a long time. Leonard watched her with a professional calm that carried beneath it a faint current of something else. Something that had been in his face since he'd first stood at the bottom of the stairs and looked at the room. She identified it eventually as a kind of reverence, not for the gold, for the act of it, for whatever combination of trust and patience and improbable faith had kept this room sealed and untouched and intact for 31 years, while the world above it went about its business, unaware. "In my career," he said, "I have assessed holdings of significant value on several occasions. Government vaults, private collections, state assets of considerable size." He paused. "I have never assessed a private holding of this scale that was not connected to an institution, a corporation, or a family of generational wealth." He looked at her steadily. "This is, to my knowledge, the largest undisclosed single-owner precious metals holding ever documented in the state of Oklahoma." Maya looked at the bars, the amber gold warmth of them, the quiet and permanent fact of them. No, she thought about her father counting his days on the single bed upstairs. She thought about Douglas Whitaker writing in April of 1993 that he trusted Raymond the same way he trusted him with everything else. She thought about a man pulling money out of the ground the old way and converting it into something that didn't lie, didn't fail, didn't require faith in anyone else's promises, something you could hold. She pressed her hands flat against her knees to stop them shaking. "What happens next?" she asked. Leonard closed his cases. "I file my report with your attorney and with the probate court within 10 business days. The report is admissible as expert testimony in any subsequent legal proceedings. At that point, the legal clock begins on the tax assessment and formal title transfer." He picked up the first case. "Oh, what happens next is that you win, Ms. Reeves, assuming the appeal fails, and in my professional opinion, the evidence strongly supports that outcome. What happens next is that this is yours." Brett Whitaker's appeal was heard 12 days later. The district court judge was a man named Howard Tully, who had the look of someone who had heard a great many arguments and found most of them less convincing than their presenters believed. He reviewed Leonard Marsh's appraisal report before the hearing. It had been filed the previous week, and he reviewed it with the attention of a man who understood that the numbers on the page changed the nature of the conversation considerably. Harlan Fitch, Brett Whitaker's attorney, made his argument with the professional confidence of a man who had prepared well. He reiterated the undue influence claim. He argued that the 1993 transfer was made under circumstances of physical and cognitive vulnerability. He introduced a medical record from 1992 showing Douglas Whitaker's heart disease diagnosis and argued that the progression of the disease made his decision-making capacity in late 1993 open to reasonable question. Patricia responded with a rebuttal that was, in Maya's estimation, the most precise and efficient thing she had witnessed in a courtroom. She submitted the handwriting analysis confirming Whitaker's competent signature. She submitted character statements from 2 men who had known Douglas Whitaker in the final years of his life. both in their 70s now, reached through careful research, who testified by affidavit that Douglas had been sharp and deliberate and entirely himself up until his death in 1994. She submitted the April 1993 letter with its clear and purposeful language as evidence of a man who was thinking clearly, planning deliberately, and acting from a considered position. Then she made a point that Maya had not heard her articulate before, and that landed in the courtroom with a specific weight. The challenger's argument requires us to believe, Patricia said, addressing Judge Tully directly, that Douglas Whitaker, a man who spent 30 years converting his earnings into gold, specifically because he did not trust institutions, did not trust paper, and did not trust anyone he hadn't personally vetted, that this man, in a moment of diminished capacity, accidentally signed over his life's work to a long-time employee whose character he had documented in writing as worthy of his trust. The alternative interpretation, that this was the most deliberate act of Douglas Whitaker's life, executed exactly as he intended, to exactly the person he chose, is not only more consistent with the evidence, it is the only interpretation consistent with everything we know about who Douglas Whitaker was. Judge Tully looked at the documents in front of him for a long moment. Then he denied the appeal. His language was not elaborate. He said the evidence of a documented professional relationship spanning 6 years, combined with the explicit notarized conveyance of personal property, combined with contemporaneous correspondence, establishing clear intent, was sufficient to uphold the lower court's determination. He said the heart disease diagnosis, without clinical evidence of cognitive impairment at the time of signing, was insufficient to establish undue influence. He said the estate of Raymond Reeves had properly passed to Elena Maya Reeves, and the assets therein were hers under Oklahoma law. Harlan Fitch said they would consider a further appeal. Judge Tully said that was his client's prerogative, but advised him to weigh the strength of the foundation he was proposing to challenge. Brett Whitaker, for the first time since Maya had become aware of his existence, looked like a man who understood that he had already lost. Not that he was going to lose, that he already had. The particular stillness of someone whose arguments have run out, and who does not yet know what to do with that information. Maya did not look at him on the way out, not because she was above it, because she was thinking about something else. She was thinking about what came next. Cole Hargrove came back 3 days after the appeal ruling. She was at the property, meeting with the county assessor's office representative, a preliminary visit ahead of the formal tax assessment, required by the probate court's order, when his black truck came down the dirt road and pulled into the gravel. He sat in the truck for a moment before getting out, watching the official vehicle parked beside Maya's battered sedan. He was calculating. She could see it from across the yard. He got out. He walked toward her with the same easy confidence as before, but there was something different in it now, something tighter. He had seen the district court ruling. The appeal denial was a public record. He knew exactly what it meant. "Ms. Reeves," he said. His voice was still pleasant. "Looks like congratulations are in order." The assessor's representative glanced between them and excused himself to wait by his car. Maya looked at Hargrove. "What do you want, Mr. Hargrove?" He tilted his head slightly. "I want to make you a better offer. The situation has changed. I understand that now." He let a beat pass. $2 million. From $480,000 to $2 million in 3 weeks. "No," Maya said. His expression shifted, not dramatically, just a degree or two toward something less constructed. "That's a significant increase from my previous offer. I think it reflects a fair. You've been running mineral rights surveys on this property for 10 years, Maya said. Through a shell company. I know about the logistics hub contingency plan. I know about the parcel requirements. She watched his face, and I don't know exactly what you found in those surveys yet. But I will, and whatever it is, it's worth more than $2 million to you, which means the answer is no. Something crossed Cole Hargrove's face. It was not anger. It was more careful than anger. It was the expression of a man who had just had a door close in front of him and was assessing how many windows remained. You don't know what you're getting into, he said. His voice was still controlled, but the pleasantness was gone. This isn't a simple inheritance situation. There are interests involved here that go beyond what your lawyer has told you, beyond what I'm authorized to tell you, frankly. He paused. There are people I represent who have been patient about this property for a very long time. That patience has limits. Is that a threat? Maya asked, and he looked at her steadily. It's a description of circumstances. I think you should leave, Maya said. He left. She stood in the yard and watched his truck go, and then she called Patricia. Patricia listened without interrupting while Maya recounted the exchange. When she finished, Patricia said 3 things. The first, document everything. Write down the exact words, the time, the date, his vehicle. Send it to me in writing today. The second, I'm filing a motion requesting full disclosure of the mineral rights surveys associated with this parcel for the past 15 years. If there's something in those surveys that establishes additional value, we need to know before anyone else gets to it. The third, more quietly, Maya, people who have been patient for a long time and whose patience has limits sometimes do things that are not legal when they run out of options. I want you to stop being at that property alone. What the mineral rights surveys had found was confirmed 3 weeks later. Patricia's motion was granted. The surveys commissioned through Hargrove's shell company were entered into the public record, and the geological firm that had conducted them was required to provide their full technical reports under discovery. The reports revealed that the parcel at County Road 18 sat directly above a formation that geologists had been quietly monitoring for 2 decades. Not oil. The conventional reserves in that part of Muskogee County had been mostly extracted by the 1980s. Something else, like a deposit of laterite that had been identified in preliminary surveys as potentially containing significant concentrations of nickel and cobalt, materials that had, in the past decade, become dramatically more valuable as components of electric vehicle batteries and industrial alloys. The formation extended under several parcels in the area, but the critical access point, the parcel whose surface position would allow economical extraction without prohibitive drilling costs, was the County Road 18 property. Hargrove had known this since at least 2019, based on the survey dates. He had commissioned the surveys quietly through a shell company because he understood that if the mineral rights situation became public before he had secured the surface rights, the parcel's value would increase dramatically and acquisition would become impossible. He had been waiting for Raymond to die. He had been watching, exactly as Raymond's sticky note had said. Patricia presented this information to Maya in a call that lasted 40 minutes, her voice carrying the particular edge of someone who has uncovered a wrong and is now in the business of correcting it. The mineral rights to this parcel passed to your father, along with the surface rights in the 1993 transfer, and they passed to you in Raymond's estate, Patricia said. You own what's above the ground, and what's below it. The nickel and cobalt formation, independent geological assessment, puts the recoverable deposit value in the range of $40 to $70 million at current industrial metals pricing. Maya sat down. On top of the gold, she said. On top of the gold, Patricia confirmed, and Hargrove knew. He knew about the mineral formation. He almost certainly did not know about the gold. His offers were too low, and his behavior was consistent with someone pursuing a mineral rights play, not a vault. He wanted to buy the surface rights cheaply to gain access to what was below them. Patricia's voice was level and precise. He was trying to take something from you that you didn't yet know you had. Maya thought about Raymond's sticky note. He's been watching us. She thought about her father on his single bed, with his photograph on the nightstand, guarding a secret he couldn't name, resisting pressure he could feel but couldn't fully explain, holding on to something he believed was important with the stubborn, a patient faith of a man who had made a promise and intended to keep it. He had known someone was watching. He had kept the doors locked anyway. She had kept the doors locked too. "What do we do about Hargrove?" she asked. "We report the shell company and the concealment of material information to the State Attorney General's office," Patricia said. "What he did isn't criminal in the direct sense. There's no law against commissioning surveys through a subsidiary, but there may be grounds for a civil claim related to the deliberate suppression of information that affected the assessed value of the estate during probate. I'm looking at it." A pause. "Either way, he's done. He knows you know. He won't be back." He wasn't. The formal transfer of assets took place on a Friday in February in Patricia's conference room, tried with a notary and 2 witnesses and a stack of documents that required Maya's signature in 27 places. She signed each one. After the last signature, Patricia slid a folder across the table. Inside was a single page, an official document from the Oklahoma Probate Court, bearing the seal of the court and the signature of Judge Carla Nix, confirming the transfer of all assets of the estate of Raymond Lloyd Reeves to Elena Maya Reeves, in full and without encumbrance. The assets included 12 acres of land in Muskogee County, Oklahoma, 1 farmhouse and associated outbuildings, mineral rights to all formations beneath the surface, 843 bars of refined gold, assayed and documented, with a certified market value of $312,400,000 at the date of appraisal. $312 million, plus the mineral formation value still being assessed, plus the farmhouse and land. Patricia shook her hand. The notary smiled politely and began gathering documents. Maya sat in the conference room chair with the single-page court order in both hands and felt a silence descend that was not the silence of a room where nothing was happening, but the silence of a room where something enormous had just settled into place. She looked at the number. She thought about the Tuesday morning with the eviction notice and the $218 and the space heater cycling between rooms. She thought about the coffee can under the sink. She thought about Lily in the dark. She thought about the pharmacy register and the dry cleaner's counter and the 11 credits toward a nursing degree and the car with the cracked manifold that had carried her back and forth to Muskogee 7 times over the past 3 months, coughing and shuddering and never quite giving up. She thought about sitting on the floor of the concrete cellar with the flashlight in her lap. For whoever comes after. This is real. She folded the court order carefully and put it in her purse. She drove home. She told the kids that night. Not the full amount. She didn't think the full amount was a number anyone under 30 had the framework to process, including her. She told them that Grandpa Raymond had left her something very valuable, something that meant they were going to be okay, really okay, for a very long time. Lily, who was 9 and had always been the one who watched and understood more than she said, asked, "Are we going to move?" "We're going to have choices," Maya said, "which is different from what we've had before." Caleb asked if they could get a dog. Maya laughed. It came out louder than she expected, the sound of something releasing that had been held under pressure for a long time. She pulled him close and said yes. Yes, they could get a dog. Lily climbed onto the couch beside her without being asked, the way she had been doing less often recently, the cautious behavior of a child who had learned not to need too much, and leaned against Maya's shoulder. "Were you scared?" Lily asked. Maya thought about it seriously, the way Lily's questions deserved to be taken seriously. "Yes," she said, "so a lot of the time. But you kept going anyway." "I didn't have a better option," Maya said. "And then, somewhere in the middle of it, I stopped being scared and just started doing the next thing." Lily was quiet for a moment. "That's what you always tell us," she said. "When something's hard, just do the next thing." Maya held her daughter and looked at the apartment she would shortly be leaving. The thin walls, the smell of mildew, the space heater in the corner, the kitchen table where the eviction notice had sat like an accusation. She looked at it without bitterness, not because it didn't deserve bitterness, but because the feeling that had replaced bitterness was something much more useful. She looked at it with the clarity of someone who had been through a thing and come out the other side knowing exactly what she was made of. The first thing she did with money in her account, before the gold had been liquidated, before the formal transfer of the mineral rights was finalized, before any of the large decisions had been made, was the same thing she had been putting off for 4 months because $45 was too much. She paid Lily's field trip fee. The field trip had already happened. The class had gone to the Science Museum in Tulsa without Lily, who had told her teacher quietly that she wasn't able to attend, and her teacher had been kind about it, which was its own particular kind of hard. But the fee was still listed as outstanding in the school's parent portal, a small red flag against Lily's account that Maya had been looking at and not looking at for months. She logged in and paid it. She sat and looked at the screen. The red flag disappeared. Lily's account showed a 0 balance and a green check. She paid Caleb's medical collection account, $300 to a number she had been avoiding for 8 months. Then the electric bill arrears, then the back rent. Then she called the pharmacy and the dry cleaner and told them she was resigning. And she said it without apology and without explanation, because neither was required, and the freedom of that was something she had not expected to feel as physically as she felt it. Patricia had referred her to a financial advisory firm in Oklahoma City, not a general wealth management company, but a firm that specifically worked with people who had come into significant assets and needed help building a framework for managing them without the accumulated financial trauma of years of scarcity, making every decision feel like a crisis. The lead advisor was a woman named Donna Park, who had a matter-of-fact warmth that Maya found immediately trustworthy. In their first meeting, Donna asked Maya what her priorities were. Not her financial priorities, her actual priorities. Maya said, her children's futures, secured in a way that would not depend on what she earned. Her nursing degree, finished. A house. Not a mansion, just a house, real and solid, with a heating system that worked, and windows that sealed, and a yard where Caleb could run, and where they could have a dog, and something for the community she had lived in, some way of making sure the money moved outward rather than just accumulating behind walls. Donna wrote it all down without commentary. "The children's accounts," she said. "We can structure trusts that are funded now, accessible at 25, used for education and housing, not accessible for anything else until they have enough life experience to use them responsibly. That's a common structure for people in your situation." Maya said that sounded right. "The nursing degree, that's simple. Tuition, living expenses, whatever you need to finish without working 3 jobs simultaneously." "I'd like to finish in under a year," Maya said. "I have 11 credits." Donna smiled. "Summer enrollment, full course load. You'll be a nurse by fall." They talked for 2 hours. When Maya left the office, she had a plan. Not a plan in the way she had always had plans. The desperate, narrow plans of someone triangulating between eviction and hunger, and just barely enough. A real plan. A plan with margin in it. A plan that assumed things would work out because she had made arrangements for things to work out. She sat in her car in the parking lot and cried for approximately 4 minutes. Not from grief or fear or any of the things that had previously made her cry in cars. From relief so comprehensive and physical that her body didn't know what else to do with it. Then she drove home. The house she bought was in a neighborhood 12 minutes from Lily's school and 8 from Caleb's. It had 3 bedrooms and a yard with 2 oak trees that were very much alive, and a covered porch on the back that faced west and caught the evening light. The heating system was 2 years old. The windows were double pane. The kitchen had a gas stove and enough counter space to actually cook in. And the first morning, she stood at it, making pancakes for the kids. She thought about Raymond's kitchen with the dishes in the drying rack and the 2-year-old calendar still on July, and she felt something that was not quite grief and not quite gratitude, but lived somewhere between them. She had gone back to the farmhouse 3 times since the transfer. The first time was with Lily and Caleb, who had never seen it. She wanted them to know where it had started. She wanted them to see the cellar, which was empty now, the gold having been transported to a secure vault facility in a process that had involved armored vehicles and insurance riders and logistics she would not have known how to imagine 4 months ago. She wanted them to see the back wall with its painted letters. Caleb had read the words slowly, lips moving. "For whoever comes after. This is real." "Is that us?" he asked. "Are we the whoever?" "We're one of the whoever," Maya said. Grandpa Raymond was one too. The second time was alone. She had walked through the empty rooms of the farmhouse by herself, without a plan or a purpose, just walking. She stood in the second bedroom where the boxes had been, all of them now cataloged and sorted. Some donated to the Historical Society in Muskogee that had expressed interest in the Whitaker documents. Some kept. A few sent to Douglas Whitaker's old employees, who were still alive and had responded with surprised gratitude to her letter. She stood in Raymond's room. She looked at the space where the nightstand had been, where her photograph had been. She had taken the photograph with her. It was on her dresser now in the new house. She stood at the window of the master bedroom and looked out at the land in February light, the brown grass and the bare trees and the flat Oklahoma sky. She finally cried for her father, not the complicated cry of a daughter with grievances, though she had those, and they were real, and she was not pretending otherwise. The simpler cry of someone who had learned, too late and yet still in time, that the person they thought they knew had been carrying something they couldn't share, had been protecting something they couldn't name, had loved in the only way available to them, given the weight of what they were holding. Raymond had not been a good father. That remained true. But he had kept faith with something impossible for 30 years, and then, at the end, trusted her with it. That was also true. Both things could be true. She was learning that both things could be true at once, and the contradiction did not have to be resolved. The third time she went back, she brought a contractor. She was not going to sell the property. That had been decided without much deliberation. The decision had arrived fully formed the same way the decision to go down the cellar stairs had arrived, certain and complete. The farmhouse would be restored, not converted, not developed, not turned into something it wasn't. Restored. The porch repaired, the roof replaced, the windows unsealed, the interior renovated to functional modern standards, while the bones of the original structure were preserved. When it was done, she intended to live there part of the time. Not permanently, not yet. Lily and Caleb needed to finish school where they were. But eventually, she had already spoken with the Muskogee County Historical Society about the cellar itself, about the back wall with Douglas Whitaker's painting, about documenting the history of the place, a self-made man's life work, his 30-year custodian, and the daughter who had come after. There was a story worth telling, and she intended to see that it was told correctly. The vindication came in pieces, the way most things did. Derek called her on a Sunday afternoon. She was sitting on the porch of the new house with a cup of coffee, watching Caleb try to teach the dog, a large, clumsy, endlessly enthusiastic yellow lab named Biscuit, to sit. The dog was not learning to sit. The dog was having the time of his life not sitting. Derek's voice on the phone was quiet. He asked how things were going. She told him. He listened. After a while, he said, "I want you to know that I have told everyone I know that I told you to sell it." She laughed. "I deserve that," he said. "I know I deserve that." "You were trying to protect us," Maya said, "in the way you knew how." "I was trying to protect what I could see," he said. "You were protecting something I couldn't see yet." She thought about that for a moment. "Maybe that's the difference," she said. "I'd spent so many years with nothing to lose. I didn't know how to calculate risk the way people do when they have something. The only direction I knew was forward." Derek said, "The kids are going to be okay." "They already are," Maya said. Her mother Linda called the following week from Broken Arrow, in the particular tone of a woman who knows she was wrong and has been rehearsing how to say so for several days. "I told you he was going to cost you more time," Linda said, "and I was wrong. And I need you to know I was wrong. Mom, I spent years watching him fail you. I couldn't separate what he had done from what he might have left behind. I couldn't." Her voice cracked slightly, which Linda did not do often. "I couldn't see past who he was to what he might have protected for you." "I almost couldn't either," Maya said honestly. "But you went down anyway." "I went down anyway." Her mother was quiet. "He did one thing right," Linda said finally. It came out with effort, each word placed deliberately. "In the end, he did one thing right." "He did," Maya said. The Facebook group was something she had mostly stopped reading. But Patricia's paralegal Seth, who had followed the probate case with professional interest and a slightly less professional investment in the outcome, had been monitoring it on her behalf and sent her a screenshot on the day the district court ruling became public. The same thread, the same group. The original post from 3 months ago with its comments about a woman poking around the old Reeves property. Below all of it, stretching now across dozens of new replies, a different conversation entirely. Did anyone see the court ruling? The woman who inherited the property. Apparently there were gold bars in the storm cellar. Like actual gold bars. I heard the same thing. Hundreds of millions of dollars. She turned down $2 million from Hargrove. Turned it down. Wasn't there someone on here who said she'd be better off just taking what she could get? And then, from the person who had written, "Bless her heart," 4 months ago, a reply of 4 words. I was so wrong. Maya put the phone down. She did not feel triumphant. She had thought she would, had expected some version of sharp satisfaction, the particular pleasure of vindication in a specific and public form. But what she felt instead was something quieter and more permanent than triumph. She felt the settled weight of a thing resolved, the particular stillness of a door that has finally, after a very long time, been opened all the way. The Reeves-Whitaker Foundation was incorporated in April. The name had been Donna Park's suggestion, and Maya had agreed to it immediately because it felt right that Douglas Whitaker's name should be attached to what his life's work made possible. He had never gotten to decide what it meant, as Raymond's letter had said. She could decide for him now. She could decide in a way she believed he would have recognized as consistent with a man who had spent his whole life converting effort into something that lasted. The Foundation's first grant cycle awarded full college scholarships to 11 graduating seniors from Muskogee County high schools. Students who had the grades and the drive and not the money. The way Maya had not had the money. Not for reasons of intelligence or effort, but purely for reasons of circumstance. The arbitrary cruelty of being born to the wrong combination of geography and income. She attended the scholarship ceremony in person. She sat in the back of the school auditorium and watched 11 teenagers walk across the stage and receive envelopes, and she watched their parents in the audience. The way some of them clasped hands, or covered their mouths, or looked at the ceiling for a moment. And she understood something about money that she had not understood before, or perhaps had understood theoretically, and was now understanding physically. Money was not happiness. That was the obvious thing, the thing everyone said, and it was true. But the absence of money was a specific and relentless kind of suffering, and his presence was a specific and relentless kind of relief. Not joy, relief. The removal of a weight you had carried for so long you had stopped noticing it was bending you, and then it was gone, and you stood up straight for the first time, and the straightness felt like something you could almost call joy if you got far enough from the weight. She watched those parents in the auditorium, and she felt the weight lifting from them in real time, and she thought about Raymond, and about Douglas Whitaker, and about the painting on the cellar wall, and she thought, this is what it was for. Not for her. Not only for her. For this. For the chain of it. For what happens when something that has been buried long enough is finally brought into the light and put to use. Leonard Marsh called her in May, 6 months after his appraisal. He was retired now, or had retired more recently than that. He'd been planning to retire when Patricia retained him, and her case had been his last professional engagement. He called from what sounded like somewhere quiet. She heard birds. He said he had been thinking about the cellar since the day he'd walked down those stairs. And he'd been meaning to call and say something he hadn't said at the time. She asked what it was. He said, "In my career, I assessed a lot of gold, enormous quantities, held by institutions that treated it as a number on a ledger. It meant nothing to them except as a balance. I used to think that was fine. That was what gold was for, to be held by people who understood its systemic value, its role in the larger architecture of finance." He paused. "What I saw in that cellar was different. What I saw was one man's life work, held in trust by another man, passed to a third person who had every reason to take the money and go, and instead decided to understand what she had before she decided what to do with it." He paused again. "I think Douglas Whitaker would have been satisfied with how it turned out. I think the men who build things the old way, the hard way, usually are satisfied when the people who come after them respect the difficulty of the building." Maya stood at the window of the farmhouse. She was there that weekend, watching the contractor's crew work on the porch, and looked out at the land. "Thank you for saying that," she said. She meant it. She finished her nursing degree in August. The ceremony was small. Summer graduations always were. And she sat in the auditorium in her gown with 11 other students who had completed their programs over the summer session. And when they called her name, she walked across the stage and shook the dean's hand and accepted the folder that contained, for the moment, only a blank page, the actual diploma to follow by mail. She stood on the stage for 1 second longer than required, looking out at the small audience. Lily and Caleb were in the third row. Lily had dressed herself carefully in the nice clothes she now had, and her posture was the careful, observant posture of a girl who understood what she was watching. Caleb was holding a handmade sign that said, "Congrats, Mom," in red marker that had slightly run, so that the R in congrats looked like it was melting. She looked at them. She thought about sitting at the kitchen table in the apartment on Oswald Terrace, counting pennies with both hands, watching her breath in the cold. She thought about the moment she had read the lawyer's letter and her hand had gone to her belly. Not hers, but the woman in Raymond's letter. And then she corrected herself, brought herself back to her own story, sitting at her own kitchen table, alone, or reading about a property that the lawyer had called, essentially, a tax burden, hearing in that description the same dismissal she had heard her whole life about the things she had. She thought about going down the stairs, about the weight of the first bar in her hands, about the number on the page. She thought about what it cost to hold something you believe in when everyone around you is telling you it isn't worth holding. She stepped off the stage. She walked to her children. Lily put her arms around her without saying anything, the way Lily did things she meant seriously. Caleb held up his sign, and then, deciding that wasn't enough, threw both arms around her waist. The sign went sideways. The R finished melting. Maya held them both and looked at nothing in particular. The ceiling, the exits, and the auditorium light, and let herself feel the full, enormous accumulated weight of where she had been and where she was standing now. Not luck, not inheritance alone. The going down, the staying down, the counting, the doing the next thing, and the next thing, and the next thing, until the next thing became this. In September, on a Saturday morning when the light came across the Muskogee land, the way Raymond had once described to her on the phone, warm and low and particular to autumn in Oklahoma, the kind of light that made the brown grass look like something worth keeping. Maya sat on the repaired porch of the farmhouse with a cup of coffee and Raymond's letter on the table beside her. She had read it many times by now. She knew it almost by heart, but she read it again. She read the part where he said he knew he didn't have the right to ask her to trust him, where he said he was asking anyway, where he said she would know what to do. She looked out at the land. The farmhouse behind her was solid now, repaired and painted, and alive in the way houses are when they are lived in. The barn was still standing. They had stabilized the roof and intended eventually to rebuild it fully. The cellar doors were still there, in their shallow depression in the earth, the padlock gone now, the doors standing open to let the November air circulate below. There was nothing left to hide. There was nothing left to protect. The secret had served its purpose. She thought about the people who had told her to sell, about the bless her heart and the I don't see what the decision is, and the gentle, loving, but completely incorrect advice to cut her losses and accept her circumstances. She did not think about them with anger. Anger had been one of the things the weight had carried, and the weight was gone now, and the anger had gone with it. She thought about them with something closer to compassion, because she had been where they were, the place where the possible was defined entirely by what you could see, and what you could see was defined entirely by what you had already experienced. She had spent 34 years inside that definition. It was a reasonable definition. It was also wrong. The possible was larger than the visible. She knew that now, in the way you know things you have learned from the inside. She picked up Raymond's letter. She folded it carefully, the same way she always folded it, along the original creases. She put it in her coat pocket. She sat on the porch and drank her coffee, and watched the autumn light move across the 12 acres her father had given her, and the cellar doors standing open in the morning air, and the flat Oklahoma sky going on in every direction past the tree line, and she thought, this is what it means to come after someone, not to repeat them, not to reverse them, to receive what they protected and decide what it becomes. She was 34 years old. She was a registered nurse, or would be in a month when the diploma arrived. She had 2 children who would never choose their clothes in the dark to avoid being a burden. She had a house with a yard and a dog named Biscuit, who had still not learned to sit. She had a foundation that had given 11 students a future they hadn't been able to afford. She had a farmhouse on 12 acres of Oklahoma land that sat above a mineral formation worth tens of millions of dollars, and above a cellar that had held $312 million in gold for 31 years, guarded by a man she had not fully known until after he was gone. She had a brass key in a drawer at home, kept not because it opened anything anymore, but because it was the thing Raymond had given her when he had nothing else left to give. She had more than she had words for. She had, most precisely and most accurately, enough. More than enough. The kind of enough that overflowed into other people's lives and kept moving. The kind of enough that Douglas Whitaker had tried to preserve by converting it into something that endured, that Raymond had kept safe by sitting still in the dark with it, and that she had found by being willing to go down. The light moved. The grass whispered. Somewhere down the road, a truck passed on the county road, and its sound faded into the silence that was not emptiness, but presence. The presence of 12 acres, and a morning and a life that had turned, finally, in the direction it had always been trying to go. Maya Reeves set her empty cup on the porch rail, She looked at the cellar door standing open in the morning light, and she smiled. Thank you so much for watching until the end. If you loved this story, check out the other videos on your screen now. I think you'll really enjoy them. And don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already. See you in the next story.